The screen glows in a dark room. A man scrolls through an endless stream of headlines. Wars, outrage, politics, scandal. Each post demands his emotion, his allegiance, his anger. Yet he feels nothing. His thumb keeps moving, his face stays still, and somewhere between the noise and the numbness, something inside him quietly shuts down. It's not fatigue, not even apathy. It's surrender. The silent surrender of thought. What if the greatest threat to civilization isn't evil, but this quiet surrender unfolding in millions of minds every single day? We imagine destruction as chaos, armies, riots, fire. But history tells a different story. Civilizations rarely collapse in one explosive moment. They rot slowly, silently, as people stop questioning. Across centuries, from empires to democracies, humanity has always feared tyrants. But the real contagion doesn't always wear a crown or command an army. It begins inside ordinary people who stop thinking for themselves. In the 1940s, as the world was consumed by one of its darkest chapters, a German theologian and philosopher named Dietrich Bonhoeffer sat inside a Nazi prison cell. He saw something few dared to admit, that the rise of tyranny didn't rely only on evil men, but on the obedience of decent ones. In his letters from prison, he wrote that stupidity is more dangerous than malice, because evil knows what it's doing. But stupidity acts with conviction, with moral certainty, and without awareness. It destroys not through hatred, but through blindness. Bonhoeffer's stupidity had nothing to do with intelligence. It was a condition of the spirit, a psychological surrender. It happens when someone stops thinking critically and lets the collective think for them. When fear or fatigue makes them whisper, someone else will decide. And the moment that happens, the mind becomes fertile ground for manipulation. You don't have to convince such a person. You only have to tell them what to believe. They'll defend it as truth, because it no longer feels like belief. It feels like belonging. We'd like to think this belongs to the past, to propaganda, dictatorships, and black and white history books. But it lives here, in our world today, hidden behind screens and wrapped in comfort. Every time we share without checking, follow without asking, or repeat because it feels safe, we reenact the same psychological pattern Bonhoeffer warned about. The platforms that promise freedom of expression are slowly teaching us to imitate one another. We think we're choosing, but most of the time, we're just reacting. Fear drives this cycle, the fear of isolation, of being the only one who disagrees. It's easier to nod along, to echo what everyone else is saying, than to stand apart. In moments of uncertainty, people trade freedom for belonging. And when millions make that trade at once, it no longer looks like obedience, it looks like consensus. We mistake collective comfort for truth. Modern life rewards this surrender. Online outrage gives us the illusion of moral participation without the effort of self-reflection. We are angry, but not awake, loud, but not aware. The algorithms that feed us news aren't designed to inform, they're designed to keep us certain that we're right, certain that others are wrong. The result isn't chaos, it's something far more stable and far more dangerous, a society that has learned to silence itself while believing it's free. Bonhoeffer's insight still feels haunting because it shows that tyranny doesn't begin with cruelty, it begins with compliance. It begins when ordinary people, good people, decide it's safer not to think. When conscience becomes a burden and silence becomes virtue. Every generation believes it's immune, yet every generation repeats the same mistake. In the past, propaganda needed editors and state media. Now it needs only an algorithm and a willing audience. We imagine evil as loud, obvious, and monstrous. But what if it's quiet? What if it looks like convenience, distraction, or loyalty? What if the collapse of consciousness doesn't sound like screams, but like the soft hum of 1,000 scrolling thumbs? Maybe the apocalypse won't arrive with fire, but with silence, as people stop thinking, one by one. Imagine walking through a city at rush hour. Thousands of people move in perfect rhythm, faces blank, steps measured, eyes fixed on glowing screens. Every gesture seems independent, yet everything follows an invisible pattern. The crowd flows like a machine, and you can't help wondering, when did people stop being people and start behaving like programmed parts? This is the world Dietrich Bonhoeffer tried to warn us about, not just a political dictatorship, but a psychological one. He believed the greatest threat to humanity wasn't ignorance, but a kind of chosen blindness. The moment an individual stops examining, stops doubting, and starts echoing, when obedience begins to feel like morality, that's when consciousness turns mechanical. Bonhoeffer called this stupidity, though not in the way we use the word today. He wasn't mocking intelligence, he was diagnosing a spiritual disease, a condition where thought is outsourced to the collective. It happens quietly, beneath awareness. A person starts aligning with slogans instead of truths. They stop listening to their conscience and begin following the rhythm of the crowd. They believe they are good because they agree. They believe they are moral because they belong. The danger is that stupidity wears the mask of virtue. It feels righteous, even noble. When everyone around us repeats the same story, our minds find comfort in the echo. We stop checking facts and start protecting feelings. In that comfort, the will to question dies, replaced by a reflex to conform. It's not that people lose intelligence, they lose the courage to use it. Carl Jung later described this in another way, as the birth of the mass-minded man, a human who has traded individuality for identity, conscience for cohesion. For Jung, this was the true crisis of modern civilization, the disappearance of the individual as the center of meaning. In his view, society had created a new kind of person, efficient, educated, yet psychically hollow. He called this psychic state collective possession. It's when a person's inner life is overtaken by the collective unconscious, the thoughts, fears, and impulses of the group. We market ourselves online, measure our worth through engagement, and optimize our lives like small businesses. You're no longer just a person. You're a brand, an algorithm, a portfolio of habits and data. The modern self doesn't rest. It updates. Even the most private parts of life have been converted into performance. The morning jog isn't just a breath of fresh air. It's a data set to upload. Meditation isn't a refuge. It's a biohacked productivity tool. Sleep is monitored, scored and graphed to prove how efficiently you rested. Even friendship has turned transactional, rebranded as networking, assigned a measurable return. We live in a marketplace of selves, where authenticity is currency and burnout the hidden tax. It all looks voluntary. That's the trap. The walls are gone, but the surveillance remains. Only now, it's internal. The prison has no bars, no guards, no escape routes. It's made of glass, transparent, bright, and inescapable, where you willingly perform under the illusion of choice. You post, you share, you update, you improve. The world applauds your productivity, and you smile, unaware that every act of optimization tightens the loop. The most powerful systems don't need to punish, they simply make you want to comply. They convince you that your exhaustion proves passion, that your anxiety means ambition. The whip is gone, the overseer redundant. You've become both the prisoner and the guard. Foucault's factory has evolved into Hans' mirror. The machines hum inside your head now. The stopwatch has been replaced by notifications, and performance reviews arrive through your own conscience. Every like, every metric, every unfinished task reflects your worth, never complete, never enough. And the deeper tragedy is that this structure feeds on sincerity. You truly believe you're choosing your goals, shaping your future, defining your success. But most of the time, the choice has already been made for you, coded into culture, engineered into technology, rewarded by society. You obey not because you must, but because you've forgotten what disobedience feels like. So when even rest must be optimized, when relaxation becomes, the room is quiet, sterile, white walls, a clipboard, a switchboard lined with dials. A volunteer sits nervously in front of it, told his job is simple: deliver electric shocks whenever the learner in the next room answers incorrectly. Each mistake means a stronger shock. Each button press, a higher voltage. He hesitates, his hand trembling. From behind him, a calm voice in a lab coat says, "Please continue." That single phrase would become one of the most haunting in the history of psychology. It was the Milgram experiment, conducted in 1961 at Yale University. Its purpose was brutally simple: to measure how far an ordinary person would go in obeying authority, even when that obedience caused harm. What Milgram discovered: still shakes our moral confidence. 65% of participants continued pressing the switch until the supposed victim screamed, begged, and finally went silent. None were forced. None were threatened. They obeyed because someone in a white coat told them to. The experiment revealed something terrifying. The human mind doesn't need cruelty to commit cruelty. It only needs permission. The voice of authority, spoken in calm tones, can silence the voice of conscience. People didn't see themselves as responsible. They saw themselves as instruments of instruction. I was just doing what I was told. That sentence has echoed through history, more times than we dare admit. Decades earlier, Dietrich Bonhoeffer had warned about this very pattern from his prison cell, that stupidity, or rather the surrender of consciousness, was more dangerous than malice. Milgram's findings brought that idea to life. These volunteers weren't sadists or monsters. They were teachers, secretaries, factory workers, ordinary citizens capable of extraordinary harm the moment their moral judgment was handed over to someone else. Around the same time, another psychologist, Solomon Asch, explored a different but equally disturbing dimension of obedience, not to authority, but to the group. In his now famous conformity experiments, he asked participants to compare line lengths, a task so simple a child could do it. But when everyone else in the room, actors working for Asch, deliberately chose the wrong answer, 1/3 of the participants went along with them, denying their own perception just to fit in. It wasn't ignorance, it was fear. The fear of standing alone, of being the one who sees differently. That same fear still rules modern life. Only now the classroom has been replaced by the internet. On social media, the new lines are drawn in opinions, hashtags, and moral positions. Every like is a vote for belonging. Every silence feels like exile. And so millions conform, not because they agree, but because they're terrified of being different. The pattern is the same. The comfort of belonging outweighs the pain of thinking. The human mind is built for connection, and that connection, when weaponized, becomes a tool of control. When the group validates your blindness, blindness becomes a virtue. The more people agree, the less anyone questions. Both Milgram and Asch uncovered what Bonhoeffer and Carl Jung had already intuited, that under social or institutional pressure, reason collapses, conscience shuts down, the mind yields to the collective trance. Logic can't penetrate it, because logic depends on individuality, and individuality has been absorbed. What makes these findings so unsettling is that they strip away our moral illusions. We like to believe we would never press the button, never agree with the wrong answer, never follow the crowd into darkness. But every generation says the same. Every generation imagines it's immune. And yet history keeps proving that obedience doesn't require evil intentions, only good people who stop thinking for themselves. These experiments don't just belong to the archives of psychology. They play out every day in workplaces, in schools, in digital platforms. Whenever someone stays silent about a lie, follows a rule they know is wrong, or joins the outrage because it feels safer than doubt, the machinery of obedience no longer needs laboratories. It's built into everyday life. If once obedience produced horrors under flags and uniforms, what might it create in an age where authority hides behind a screen, faceless, algorithmic, and always watching? There's a strange kind of intelligence ruling the modern world. Efficient, productive, and completely unconscious. We call it progress. But behind the glitter of innovation, an invisible exchange takes place every day. Awareness traded for performance, conscience replaced by compliance. For the first time in history, humanity has built a civilization where stupidity isn't a flaw to be corrected, but a function to be maintained. Psychologists now call it functional stupidity, the ability to think selectively, follow orders perfectly, and succeed without ever asking why. It's the kind of stupidity that keeps companies running, governments stable, and social systems unchallenged. It rewards obedience dressed as professionalism, prizes silence disguised as loyalty, and punishes those who ask, "Why are we doing this?" In corporate towers, people attend meetings filled with words like alignment, synergy, and values. Everyone nods, everyone agrees. Deep down, many know something doesn't add up, but no one dares to say it. The one who questions risks being labeled difficult, negative, or not a team player. The safest move is to blend in, and so entire industries run on unspoken conformity. In classrooms, the pattern starts early. Education no longer teaches how to think, but what to remember. Students are rewarded for accuracy, not imagination. The goal is to repeat knowledge, not create it. The system produces well-behaved minds that fit in, not free ones that question. By adulthood, most people have mastered the art of agreeing without believing. Online, the cycle completes itself. Outrage becomes entertainment, and complexity becomes the enemy. On social media, the fastest way to rise is to simplify, polarize, and provoke. Thoughtful conversation gets buried beneath noise because algorithms are built to reward emotion, not reflection. The loudest wins, the calmest disappears. People learn that being right matters less than sounding confident. Even in spiritual or ideological spaces, the same logic thrives. Those who question dogma are treated as threats to unity. The obedient believer, the one who follows without doubt, is praised as virtuous. The one who asks uncomfortable questions is quietly exiled. Faith becomes less about truth and more about tribe. Across every sphere, business, school, politics, religion, the pattern repeats. The system rewards passivity and punishes awareness. Carl Jung would call this the loss of soul, a fragmentation of the human psyche. When people stop confronting their inner contradictions, they become divided beings, outwardly functional, but inwardly fractured. Dietrich Bonhoeffer saw the same fracture from another angle: morality without conscience, a society that behaves ethically only because rules demand it, not because understanding inspires it. Together, their ideas describe our era with painful precision, a civilization that looks organized but feels spiritually hollow. What makes functional stupidity so powerful is that it feels good. It offers safety, approval, belonging. The person who conforms is rewarded with comfort and community. The one who resists faces exclusion and ridicule. That's how a society starts to normalize unethical behavior, not through hatred or violence, but through habit. No one sets out to build an unjust world. It happens when people keep their heads down long enough. We live in a paradoxical time, cities glowing with light, but dim in thought. Screens shine brighter than the human mind. We measure intelligence by productivity and empathy by slogans. We believe we're informed, yet most of our convictions are borrowed. It's as if the collective mind has gone on autopilot, driving itself forward without ever asking where it's going. And perhaps that's the most tragic part. The realization that control no longer needs a dictator, it only needs our quiet participation. Every time we scroll past dishonesty without speaking, every time we mimic opinions we don't believe, every time we trade honesty for acceptance, we hand over the keys willingly. So the question is no longer who controls us, but why we keep giving them the keys. The world doesn't collapse in a single moment. It fades quietly, through the slow erosion of conscience. Yet every age still gives rise to a few who refuse to disappear into the crowd. They don't march under banners or lead revolutions. Their rebellion is quieter, lonelier, and infinitely harder. They fight not against governments, but against hypnosis, the hypnosis of conformity. Carl Jung called this awakening individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole. Dietrich Bonhoeffer described it in spiritual terms as costly grace, the courage to live by conscience, even when obedience feels easier. Both men, from entirely different worlds, pointed to the same truth. The salvation of humanity begins with the restoration of the individual, not the collective, not the ideology, not the system, the individual. To awaken, a person must stop echoing and start listening. They must replace imitation with introspection. It sounds noble, but in practice, it's brutal. Awareness strips away illusions. It isolates before it liberates. When you begin to think for yourself, the world around you grows quiet. Friends drift. Certainty dissolves. Comfort disappears. But that's the cost of seeing clearly. Every step toward consciousness means stepping away from approval. In a society that worships speed and noise, silence itself becomes an act of rebellion. To sit alone with your thoughts, to doubt what everyone else accepts, to choose honesty over belonging. These are radical gestures now. Jung believed true freedom isn't the ability to do whatever you want, but the courage to face who you are. That includes the shadow, the parts of yourself you deny, fear, or project onto others. Without confronting that darkness, a person remains divided, trapped in the same unconscious patterns that shape the collective. Bonhoeffer saw the same truth through a moral lens. He warned that integrity isn't built by perfect people, but by those willing to suffer for what's right. From his prison cell, he wrote that the world could only be saved by men and women who act responsibly before God. Those who act from conscience, not convention. His costly grace wasn't comfort, it was a demand, to stand alone if necessary, to think when thinking is forbidden, to speak when silence is celebrated. Awakening, in this sense, isn't glamorous. It's not a lifestyle. It's a kind of spiritual warfare against laziness, against denial, against the seductive pull of the herd. Jung said the most dangerous psychological act is becoming conscious of oneself, because once you see, you can never unsee. You can't go back to the comfort of illusion. Awareness breaks you first, then rebuilds you on the foundation of truth. In today's world, thinking for yourself has become a form of civil disobedience. Every algorithm demands your attention. Every ideology demands your loyalty. But the conscious mind belongs to no one. It questions everything, especially what feels safe. It refuses to surrender its will to trends, to crowds, or to gods made of pixels. To think clearly in an age of noise is to light a single candle in a neon storm, small, fragile, but untouched by the chaos around it. True resistance isn't external. It doesn't shout or destroy. It restores, it integrates, it makes the divided mind whole again. This is what Jung called individuation, the merging of shadow and light, reason and feeling, faith and doubt. And this is what Bonhoeffer's costly grace demanded, a life guided by inner truth, not external approval. Together, their message forms one timeless command: reclaim yourself, because you can't save the world before saving your own mind. No revolution, no ideology, no progress can make up for a society full of unconscious individuals. The future depends not on louder movements, but on quieter awakenings, on those willing to think when thinking no longer feels natural. So ask yourself, are you thinking, or are you being thought? Maybe the decision to awaken will never trend. It won't earn applause or validation, but it will return the one thing modern life has stolen, yourself. And in that reclamation lies the beginning of everything real, everything human, everything worth saving.